Luke chapter 20 for a few minutes tonight. We're going to be a little brief this evening because we have some business we need to attend to. So I don't want us to be too long or too late because I know some of y'all need your beauty sleep. Amen. Luke chapter 20, and we're going to be looking at the scribes and their work in trying to trap Jesus and how Jesus kind of responds to that. And so that's where we're at tonight. So Luke chapter 20, we're going to start in verse 45. We're going to start in verse 45, and we're going to go through, and we're going to end in actually chapter 21. And then we're going to go back to chapter 20 up to like verse 37, and I'll read through that. We won't have all that on the screen tonight because we're going to talk about some of the context. I like putting contextual pieces together and showing how they all kind of fit. And so here's what we read tonight, Luke chapter 20, beginning in verse 45. And in the hearing of all the people, he said to his disciples, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and love greetings in the marketplaces and the best seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at feasts, who devour widows' houses and for pretense make long prayers. They will receive greater condemnation." So there's a couple of things that I want us to kind of focus in on here. In chapter 20, Jesus has been kind of accosted. And what's happening, they're trying to trap him. And so if you go back and you just kind of glance over at chapter 20, verse 1, we see that Jesus is teaching, and they decide that they want to ask him some questions. And so one of the first questions they ask him is, tell us by what authority you do these things, or who it is that gave you this authority. And so they're trying to question the authority of Jesus. And from that then, Jesus kind of begins this teaching, this section of teaching. And through this, we see that there's the parable of the wicked tenants, and you guys are familiar with that. And then they ask him, well, tell us about taxes. You jump down to verse 19. The scribes and the chief priests say to lay hands on him at the very hour, for they perceived that he told this parable against them. And they feared the people, so they watched him and sent spies who pretended to be sincere, that they might catch him in something he said, so as to deliver him up for authority and jurisdiction of the governor. So they asked him, "Teacher, we know that you speak and teach rightly and show no partiality, but truly teach the way of God. Is it lawful for us to give tribute to Caesar or not?" But he perceived their craftiness and said to them, "Show me a denarius. Whose likeness and inscription does it have?" They said, "Caesar's." He said to them, "Then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God." And then they go on to ask him. The Sadducees then begin to question him. And these Sadducees came, and in verse 28 they said, "Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, having a wife but no children, the man must take the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers who first took a wife and died without children, and the second and the third took her, and likewise all 7 left no children and died. Afterward the woman also died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will she be?" And then Jesus gives them the answer, the sons of this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy to attain to that age and to the resurrection from the dead, neither marry nor are given in marriage, for they cannot die anymore, because they are equal to the angels and are sons of God, being sons of the resurrection. But, which, by the way, wouldn't that be a great Southern gospel name? Sons of the resurrection? Anyways, but that the dead are raised, even Moses showed in the passage about the bush, where he calls the Lord the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now, he is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. And so, he goes on to talk about all of this. So how does all of this tie together? They're constantly trying to trap Jesus. They're constantly trying to trick him. And so what he does here is he's actually going to be talking about them for a second. And so he's giving us specifically this warning about the scribes. And he's saying this in the hearing of all the people. Now, who were the scribes and what were they about? the scribes, so you basically had the Sadducees and the Pharisees. One was more of a religious sect. The other was a religious sect. And then you have the scribes that are oftentimes just kind of lumped into them. And the scribes are, let's just say, they're kind of I hate to call them scholars, but that's kind of what they were. They were learned. They were kind of like religious attorneys focused on historic theology and the Old Testament and the way things used to be. And so the scribes were often with these other two groups because the Sadducees were powerful, the Pharisees were powerful, and they liked to have the scribes that they could kind of get to help them twist the word around so that they could kind of get what they wanted. And so Jesus is looking at these people who are trying to trap him, and in the hearing of all these people, he warns them. And he gives this, this is a public declaration. Now, a lot of times when we talk about Jesus, especially the people in our modern culture who misunderstand Jesus a lot, they think about Jesus being a wimp, a doormat, a pushover. Well, that wasn't Jesus at all. The Jesus that taught you to turn the other cheek, yes, is the same Jesus that went in and turned over tables in the temple and made a whip and chased people out. That's the same Jesus. And so there's a complexity to Jesus. There's some people who would say, well, we should just keep our mouths shut, and we should never do anything. We should never say anything. We should just be timid and just sit around and let people walk all over us and do all this kind of stuff. Well, the problem is it's okay. It's okay to do that. And actually, there's a lot of times when we're supposed to do that. But there's also the need for protection. We have to protect people because here's what happens. A lot of people who are novices in the faith will say, they hear something and it sounds good. And so they start to kind of listen to it. And they start to kind of get on track with it. And then the next thing you know, they've followed this little Pied Piper of religion off into the weeds. And they're no longer walking on the path of the way of Jesus. They've gone somewhere else. And they're not really in the truth. And so we have to lovingly and graciously stand for truth. And when we see people who are blatantly wrong, we have to, in a loving way, correct them. Jesus here is calling the scribes, these people that we have to be warned about, not because he hates scribes, but because he loves the people. And he needs to protect the people that he loves from the scribes that would use them and simply have them be tools of manipulation. And so he gives this warning publicly, and then he says this. He says, beware of the scribes, and he gives us some examples who like to walk around in long robes. The walking around in long robes at this time, I want you to think about where Jesus lived, the time in which Jesus lived, right? They walked on the same streets that animals walked on. They walked on the same streets that people, lived around. They didn't have, the indoor plumbing and septic systems and all. My septic tank just cost $10,000. Gosh, it's expensive. They didn't have all that stuff, though. You see what they did? They kind of just threw their stuff out in the road. And so when he's talking about these scribes and their long robes, long robes were impractical. They got mired in the mud and the filth and all of the things that you walked through and you walked around and you were involved with. And so for someone at this time to be walking around in long robes, it was a statement of their wealth. They had a lot of money. They could afford to have something that was going to have to be hemmed multiple times. That they could afford something that was going to have to be cleaned because they could afford it. They weren't going to have to clean it themselves. So it was a the long robes were kind of a statement of multiple things. And some scholars make the argument that the long robes were not only like a cultural statement talking about money and wealth and affluence and all of those kind of things, but it could also be a religious statement that they were making. Look at us, we're wearing these long robes and we're so holy and we're so spiritual, and kind of look at us in that way. So he says they love to walk around in these long robes, these outer garments that make them stand apart, these things that make them look special. And then he said also, while they're out walking around in their long robes, they love greetings in the marketplace. And when he's saying greetings in the marketplace, sometimes I read things like that, and I read them with my wife's mind in my mind. And so what I interpret, like if I were to talk to Stephanie about that, she would probably say, see, you shouldn't be talking to everybody you see in Walmart. But that's not necessarily what that means. What that's talking about is they love the greetings in the marketplace. They love to be recognized. They love recognition. They love people to see them in their long robes and go, oh, brother so-and-so, Dr. so-and-so, scribe so-and-so. They want to be recognized like that in the marketplace and be made to feel special. And they like to be treated special because they like the best seats in the synagogue. And the synagogues, of course, were places of worship. And these places of worship where they would go, they had select seating for different people. And depending on your caste and who you were in society and how important you were, sometimes you'd sit here, and then if you worked your way up, maybe you could sit over there and that kind of stuff. And so they were kind of, their entire life, from what they wore to going shopping to going to worship, everything was about their pride and their arrogance and their selves. And then he kind of turns and he talks about, and they want these places of honor at the feast, and this is the very same thing that we were just talking about, who devour widows' houses. What does he mean, devour widows' houses? I'm sorry? They didn't mind at all to take a widow's property, finances, whatever they could legally take. Didn't bother them at all if they could put it in their pocket, even if it cost her to have to live on the street. That's exactly what he's talking about. And then at the same time, taking advantage of these people, these widows who are viewed as some of the most needful of help and assistance and support in the community. At the same time, they're robbing from these people who are vulnerable. He says, and for pretense, make long prayers. So he's talking about the juxtaposition of their lives. They would rather kick an old woman out of her house and take her money, and then in the very next second, go take their fancy seat in the synagogue and make this long, elegant prayer to make themselves sound really spiritual and really holy. And then he gives this warning. He says, they will receive the greater condemnation. Then he shifts gears in chapter 21. And he says, look at verses 21, 1 through 4. Jesus looked up. Pause. When you're reading the Bible, one of the keys that we need to make sure that we keep focused in on, right, are settings and scenes, transitions. A lot of times you'll come to the end of a paragraph or the end of a chapter or the end of a section, and then the very next one will start with, and he went da-da-da-da-da, or they left da-da-da-da-da, or they traveled da-da-da-da-da. So what we see here is there's no change in setting, no change in scene. Jesus is still in this place, meeting with these people, warning them about the scribes, and that's when he looks up. And this is what he saw. He saw the rich putting their gifts, offerings, into the offering box, and he saw a poor widow putting in 2 small copper coins. And he said, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them. For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on. Now, we've all talked about the widow's offering, the widow's gift, the widow's mite, however you want to say it. In the Greek, she gave a lepta, right? And I know you guys already know this. And I know that you guys probably already know that a lepta is 1/100th of a denarius, right? And a denarius is the equivalence of a day's wage. I know you guys already know that. Here's what I want you to see. And these Wednesday nights are not just about our lessons, but they're about hopefully teaching you how to read and get a little bit more out of the scripture. Why did I go back and read all that in chapter 20? Let's just go back and look at what we read. So we're challenging the authority of Jesus, scribes, elders, all of these people. He began to tell the people, verse 9, about this plant, this vineyard, and the thing. And then we get down to verse 19. Oh, I forgot one of the key things. I skipped over. Chapter 20, verse 1. One day, as Jesus was teaching the people in the temple, so there's your setting. Jesus is teaching in the temple, which is how he looks up and sees the offerings and the gifts, okay? Now I'll go back to verse 19. The scribes and the chief priests sought to lay hands on him. They watched him, sent spies. They do all these things. They ask him this question. Here's a clue. You guys ready? Clue number 1. Teacher, we know that you speak and teach rightly and show no partiality, but truly teach the way of God. Verse 22. Is it lawful for us to give tribute to Caesar or not? What's the question? Giving. It's about giving. How does Jesus answer? Show me a denarius, a day's wage. And they could. These guys had money. They're in the temple. They're asking about giving, right? Where are we going to end up, church, in chapter 21 at the beginning? About a woman who didn't even have a denarius to give. Who's giving? Right? The connections. You start to see it? You start to see it? Follow the next connection. Down to verse 27. There came to him some Sadducees. Right? Those who deny that there is a resurrection. And they asked him a question saying, Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, and we go on to this ridiculous question about she's married 7 times, which brother is her husband in the afterlife, right? What's that about? What do we call a woman who loses her husband? A widow. They question regarding giving. Now they question regarding widows. Are we seeing the connection? Okay. Jesus' answer is basically this. He's talking to Sadducees. And Luke wants us to know something about the Sadducees. This is a sect that does not believe in the resurrection. Here are the things that the Sadducees believe. Number 1, they only believe in the Torah. Right? So if you look at the Old Testament, and you just look there from Genesis all the way over to before Matthew starts. You know, you get into Malachi, and the end of Malachi, there's your Old Testament, right? This is called the Tanakh, okay? The Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim. And what that literally means is the Torah is the law. The first 5 books of the Bible, that's the law, that's the Torah, the book of Moses, they might call it. The Nevi'im, that's the prophets, all the prophetic works, all the prophetic writings. The Nevi'im, the word Nevi'im means prophet in Hebrew. And Ketuvim, we talked about this a while back. Ketuvim means the cuttings. The Ketuvim means the cuttings. And if you remember, Nevi'im, hear that im on the end? Ketuvim, im on the end, that's plural. So now that's your Hebrew lesson for tonight. Okay? So if you hear the im, seraphim, those are the angels that are called the burning ones. That's plural. The cherubim, plural. So anytime you hear that im on a word, that's plural. And so the ketuvim means all of the different writings, the things that they would cut into a papyrus, and then later on, the way they would write it, they would scribe, they would cut the words onto the page, basically is what they would say. And so that's all the writings of the Old Testament. They said, none of that matters. The only thing that matters is the Torah. So the Sadducees believe only the Torah. They do not believe in the resurrection. They do not believe in angels. Right? So knowing, right, they've asked about Moses, who wrote the Torah that they believe in, knowing that they don't believe in the resurrection, and they're asking a question about the resurrection. Whose wife will she be in the resurrection? Jesus' answer is, well, they're better than angels that you don't believe in, guys. Did you catch it? So Jesus is talking here to the Sadducees. So we've had scribes, chief priests, Sadducees, all of these people, the elders, they're all involved. Jesus gives this answer. Sons of this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy to attain to that age and to the resurrection. All right, so he's saying basically not everybody gets the chance to grow old, and not everybody gets the chance to be resurrected. That's basically what he's telling them. He's saying, guys, maybe you don't believe in the resurrection because you're not saved. Anyways, so then he continues on. He says, the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage, for they cannot die anymore because they are equal to the angels. So there he's bringing in the angels that they don't believe in, and are sons of God, being sons of the resurrection. But that the dead are raised, even Moses showed in the passage about the bush where he calls the Lord the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Now he is not God of the dead, but God of the living. So he's talking about how they continue to live. There is an afterlife, that there is more beyond this physical existence. And that's when the scribes get involved again. They say, some of the scribes answered, "Teacher, you have spoken well," for they no longer dared to ask him any questions. Then Jesus kind of goes on the offensive. How can they say that the Christ is David's son? For David himself says in the book of Psalms, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. David thus calls him Lord. So how is he his son? And so he's basically telling them, I can play this game too. I can ask you questions that you don't have answers to. The only difference is I have the answers. And that's when he turns on the scribes and he gives this. And so basically what he has done here is we're talking about widows. We're talking about giving. We're talking about a pompous pretense of worship. We're talking about an outward appearance of holiness, but an inward depravity that is absent God and godliness. And then Jesus looks up in chapter 21, and he looks up and he saw the rich putting their gifts into the offering box. And he saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. So here it's coming back all around. He's saying, guys, you've asked me questions about is it right to give to Caesar or not? The real question is, where's your act of worship in your giving? Real worship isn't how much you can put in. Real worship is trusting God for how much you don't have. That's worship. Worship is trusting God more than the money to provide the bread. You want to talk about widows? This widow that you would use and manipulate, that you would take everything that she has, gladly gives everything that she's got to God. You see how it all ties together now. This wasn't an accident. This was a sovereign opportunity for Jesus to show these people who made their living trying to tell other people what religion really was. This was an opportunity for them to really see what true religion really looked like. He says, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them. How? She only put in the lepta, the 2 copper coins, the mite. She's only put in this small thing. How has she put in more? Because real worship is about giving yourself. That's what worship is. this is powerful. I mean, it's powerful when we just talk about the widow and the widow's mite. But I think what multiplies the power of it is that we see how these people are willing to ask these ridiculous questions about widows, how they're willing to try to trap Jesus with these silly questions like, if God can do anything, can he make a rock so big he can't move it? They don't get it. They don't understand it. These learned scholars who everyone looks to for answers could have learned the most valuable lesson of all simply by watching this one poor widow demonstrate what true faith looks like. I think one of the things that we kind of gloss over in this, you can say something and somebody hears it and they hear the wrong thing. They take the wrong thing away from it. The other day I was speaking to a group of ladies about poverty and about what that looks like. And I was telling a story, and the story was one of the churches that I served early on. We had a bus ministry, and we would go throughout Overton County picking up kids, picking up whoever would come, and get on the bus and come to church, and that's what we would do. And one of the families that we picked up lived in a trailer park, and I don't even know how many kids they had. But it was a very sad situation where you had a matriarch, right? And she had a couple of sons who were grown men. And then these couple of sons had fathered, 10 or 12 kids by these 2 or 3 women that lived in the trailer park too. And I never could figure out which one was which one's mama and which one's daddy, because these two would be together for a while, and then they'd get mad at each other, and then these two would be together for a while, and this one would get with the other brother, and they just kind of did this. We had full brothers and sisters, half brothers and sisters, and it was just the craziest thing. And they were all the time sending the kids on the bus to church, asking for help. They'd send the kids pitiful in their clothes that were all dirty and torn, and they didn't have anything, and they'd send letters with them saying, we need groceries, or we need this, or we need that, and the church would try to help them. And one time the church actually went and just bought a bunch of groceries and took to them, and got mad then because they watched through the door while they're handing them the groceries that they're going through the bag, and just some of the stuff's going straight in the trash. And our knee jerk to that is, well, how dare they? At the same time, learning later on, when you're dealing with people in poverty, there's two how dare theys there. One is how dare they just throw away these gifts that people have sacrificed and paid for into this. The other one is kind of, how dare the church think they know best what this family needs and what they'll eat, and that kind, which is why I really like the food pantry, the food bank, kind of model where they get to be active participants in what's provided. It's not just like, here, you're going to take what I give you and you're going to like it. It's we respect the dignity of who you are, that you have value, and we want to give you the choice in this. And so, anyways, I told that story, and the point of it that I was making was later on in the story. Another one of the things that the family had done is they had, they were constantly needing money to pay bills. And one day we go to pick the kids up, we knock on the door, they open up, and they got a brand new, massive flat screen TV in the trailer. And this was like in the mid 2000s. I didn't even have a flat screen TV. I mean, that they were new. This was something that didn't happen. And so it would be easy for people to get mad that this poor family had spent money on a flat screen TV when their kids had dirty clothes and they didn't have food and they couldn't pay their bills. And what I learned through my doctoral work is actually poverty is a culture within itself. Like it's almost like, there's an American culture, there's a French culture, there's a Russian culture, there's a poor culture, there's a middle class culture, there's a rich culture. It's just a different way of thinking. It's a different mindset. It's a different value system. It's just completely different in a lot of different ways. And one of the examples that they use when they're talking about wealth, is they say, okay, let's just say you're middle class, and I think most of us would probably be in that ballpark, somewhere around there. And they say, just want you to imagine for a second that this really happens, not just pretend happens, but really happens. I want you to imagine for a second that some uncle that you never knew that you had is a billionaire, right? And the uncle comes up to you and introduces himself and says, hey, I'm your uncle. You've never met me, but I'm wanting to reconnect with my family. I want to do something special for you. So I'm going to take you and I'm going to fly you on my private jet to Paris. And when you get to Paris, I'm going to take you to a Michelin star rated restaurant. And you can have anything you want. Initially, we think, sign me up for that. I want to meet that uncle, right? Here's the thing I want you to do. I want you to look around the room. I want you to notice what we look like. Do me a favor, right? While we're looking at what we look like, do me a favor. I want you to say y'all. That feel normal? Yeah. I want you to see, what are we wearing? Hey, Sybil, you think you got something in your closet to wear to a Michelin-rated restaurant in Paris? Nathan, if I take you to this Michelin-rated restaurant in Paris, and let's just say I buy you a tuxedo so you can go in, right? Because, obviously Talon has a tuxedo, but nobody else does, right? You think you can read that menu in French and know what you're going to order in French? How are you going to... It's terrifying. And when we tell poor people, hey, just pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Do what I do. That's akin to someone in Paris walking up to you and saying, hey, just put on your tuxedo and come with me. Order in French. It's a completely different culture. And so the point that I'm trying to make to this group that I'm talking to is that the reason they will spend their money on a television is not because they're idiots, and it's not because they're just terrible people. It's because in their culture, so money. Let's think about money for a second, since that's kind of what we're talking about. Middle class people, right? They look at money as what? It's a tool. It's a resource. You manage it. You leverage it. You make it work for you. Right? Because you're going to have a little money today. You probably get a little more money tomorrow. You get a little bit more money after that. You get a little bit more money after that. And you pay your bills. You get good credit. You can borrow more money. You get more things. You can pay it back. You can climb the ladder working and leveraging this tool that we call money. Rich people don't do that. Money is completely different to them. Money is something that you play with. I've got an extra $100,000, so I just went ahead and bought some more Tesla stock. I just thought it looked like a good buy. I had a friend who was telling me about a vacation that he went on the other day, and he went to some island in Georgia, off the coast of Georgia. And it's owned, I forget what he called it. It's an island I'd never heard of before. But it's kind of like Tybee Island or something like that, but not, because the people that were using Tybee Island didn't want these other people being part of their club. So these families that were rich decided they were going to start buying land on this other island. And so he went to this island, and he said there's only like one bed and breakfast on it. You can camp in places on the island, but most of it is just like summer residences, right? And he said he was talking while he was down there to a ferryman that runs the ferry back and forth from the mainland. And they just got to talking. And he said the ferryman told him that the houses on this island were owned by people who were related to like the Vanderbilts, or the Carnegies, those kind of people. And he said the ferryman told him one time that he was ferrying some people back and forth. And he just struck up a conversation with him. He said, I haven't seen you guys here in a long time. And they said, well, sometimes we just forget we have this place. Don't you hate it when you forget about one of your vacation homes on the islands in Georgia? Man, I'm fussing about paying $10,000 for indoor plumbing. That's how rich people look at money. Poor people, money is a novelty. When they have it, spend it. Because you don't know when you're going to get it again. What are you going to spend it on? I'm going to treat my kids. I'm going to take them to McDonald's. They'd never get to go to McDonald's. Or, look at this tax refund we just got. Let's go buy that big TV at Walmart. Why? Here's the clue. Because what they value is not the money. What they value is not the TV. What they value is the social collateral in their relationships. If you've got the biggest, best television in the trailer park, guess where everybody wants to watch the game Sunday? You're popular. People want to be around you. They want to come to your home. And then the guy who was giving the lecture when we were talking about all this, he said, now you tell me, which values are better than the others? The poor people who value relationships and other people? The middle class people who value climbing the social ladder and getting more stuff? Ouch. I told that story and kind of lectured on this for an hour. And at the end of it, this woman came up to me and said, you know what? This one time we hired a guy to work for us, and he was working through lunch, and he hadn't brought lunch. And so my husband said, well, my wife will make you some lunch. And so I went into the kitchen, and I made him some lunch, and I brought it out and gave it to him. And he thanked us and everything. And then later on, our son came and said he didn't eat his lunch. And she said, all this time, I thought he was just too proud to want to take something from us. But now, after hearing you, I finally understand what it was. He just didn't like what I made him. And I'm like, I failed. Sometimes we see something and we miss the point of it. And the point of all of that is this. We may think that the most important thing about worship is not having technical difficulties. Being able to have the screens working and have the words up there the way they're supposed to. Having the video work and edited and online for people to see. That's not the most important thing in worship. The most important thing in worship is not what the preacher says and what you get out of the sermon. The most important part of worship is how much of yourself do you leave in the presence of God as a gift and an offering to Him. That's the most important part of worship. So on that, let's enter into a time of prayer requests. And we're going to have our time of prayer.